Order, order. Preet Kaur Gill to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Dorris, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move that this House has considered investment in the provision of English for speakers of other languages. I'm grateful for the opportunity to open this debate on a subject which is very close to my heart and to my community, the urgent need to invest in English as a second language, in particular for refugees. In my constituency, I'm fortunate to represent a place which is diverse, inclusive and welcoming, and I'm proud to be from a city of sanctuary like Birmingham that has almost 500 people since the beginning of the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme living there. Last summer, I was fortunate enough to meet with 12 people from Syria who had started new lives in Birmingham, supported by Refugee Action, who shared with me their experiences of life in the UK. The refugees I met spoke about how respectful and kind those around them had been, how comfortably their children had settled into local schools, and what a great place Birmingham has been to live in. However, the biggest problem that almost everyone wanted to raise with me was a lack of sufficient access to English language learning. People had different reasons for wanting to improve their English. For one family, it was to ensure they could communicate properly with healthcare professionals to support their daughter with her complex health needs. For another, it was so that they could speak English well enough to pass their driving test in the UK. And for another, it was so that he could take up the profession he had held back home in Syria as a football coach. I also want to mention Noor. He is a Syrian refugee living in Birmingham who I met with earlier today and is here today listening to this debate. Noor is a passionate champion of the importance of learning English, and I want to share with you his powerful words. He says, when you start to speak English fluently, it means you can get a good job and make your dreams come true. I'm working hard. I want to create a company like Microsoft. You will see, I will achieve my dreams and goals. The experiences of this group of refugees is mirrored by many people of different backgrounds, with different motivations, but with the same ambition to be able to better communicate with the community around them. We should support this ambition and be a country which is open and welcoming. But this requires support to people after they have arrived here. Language classes are fundamental in building cohesive communities. Yet many barriers exist for people to access classes and struggle to find the opportunity to learn to speak English. I will.
Can I thank the friend for giving way and also congratulate her for this debate. I think it's clear that basically sport both in the refugee community and in the British public for having these classes. Do you agree that particular concern is that the women with children who are prevented accessing these classes because there's no provision for children?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he makes a really valid point and something I'm going to touch on later in my speech. Let's not pretend otherwise that government cuts to ESOL over the last decade have been ruthless. Refugee Action's report, Turning Words into Action, shows that government funding for ESOL in England fell from £212.3 million in 2008 to £105 million in 2018. And this is a shocking real-term cut of almost 60% in a decade. Unsurprisingly, this decline in funding has been accompanied by a decline in adult participation in ESOL classes by nearly 40% over the same period. I will.
I'm a friend for giving way and for securing this important debate, which many of us have been raising over the last 9 years as we've seen the erosion of courses. But does she recognise that there is a new threat to funding of ESOL courses in that the European Social Fund has been a significant supporter of those courses? And will she hope that the Minister in her winding up will give a commitment to match pound for pound funding from the European Social Fund for ESOL courses in the future?
I thank my honourable friend for that really important intervention. And he's absolutely right. So many members across this House have been campaigning for this over the last decade, and I hope the Minister heard the request from my honourable friend and will respond to that. Last month, a research report by the Government Social Research Team, using methodology agreed with the DfE, found that the demand for English language was high, with almost 3/4 of survey respondents reporting a significant demand for English language learning provision in the communities they serve. However, the providers are struggling to meet that demand. Over half of respondents found it fairly difficult to meet the demand, and 1 in 8 found it very difficult. The overstretching of these providers hits learners hard, particularly the most vulnerable. New research carried out by Refugee Action found that 59% of refugees did not think they had received enough ESOL teaching hours, and only 34% of respondents felt that their current level of English was not enough to make them ready to work in the UK. And the third sector are unable to fill these gaps because limited funding for them means they have little or no access to hardware and technology to support their teaching. Well,
Thank my honourable friend for giving way and for securing this really important debate. She makes the point about third sector provision, and in my constituency of Newcastle upon Tyne Central, we have First Steps and the Angelou Centre who provide ESOL classes, as well as Newcastle City Council and Newcastle College. But because of the devastating cuts, they are unable to in any way meet the demand. And my constituents and refugees in Newcastle speak to me often of the need to increase provision of ESOL so that it is not just a lucky few who can receive the gift, if you like, of the English language.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I think it's really important that we hear first-hand experiences of actually members that are representing their communities of just how difficult and the impact of cuts have really been. It is extremely disingenuous for the Education Secretary to praise ESOL as a way towards social mobility and inclusion without providing much-needed resources. Women are disproportionately impacted by barriers to ESOL, and they miss out on the benefits those who are able to learn English gain. More than 3/4 of parents said that a lack of childcare had been a barrier to their ability to attend English lessons. And for those on a low income, practical and logistical barriers exist. 1/4 of refugee respondents, for example, had not been able to access any financial assistance to pay for travel to classes. This can mean people are forced to miss classes because they are unable to travel to them. Finally, some groups are excluded altogether from accessing English, such as asylum seekers, who in England can only become eligible for funding if they've been waiting for a decision on their claim for 6 months or longer. This includes a broader issue with the current resettlement process, which researchers from the University of Sussex found is leading to a tragic waste of refugees' unfulfilled potential. The government frequently talks about the importance of ESOL provision for refugees. Back in 2016, after many years of ESOL cuts, pressure from these benches, charities and civil society forced the government to give additional funding for people arriving under the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. Though welcome, this fairly modest pot of money only supported one group of people to learn English and therefore cannot be seen as a solution to the wider problems of access to ESOL. The government's 2018 Integrated Communities Green Paper acknowledged the vital importance of English for integration, but gave no new money specifically to ESOL. In its Immigration White Paper in 2018, the government committed to an ambitious and well-funded English language strategy to ensure that everyone in this country, especially those with newly recognised refugee status, are supported to speak the same language. Once again, though, no new funding. The government's failures to act flies in the face of public opinion, which is strongly in favour of supporting people to learn English. Recent independent polling by YouGov, for example, shows 91% of the British public believe it is important that refugees who come to the UK learn to speak English. And if the government is serious about allowing everybody the possibility to learn English, investment, not empty promises, must be made. Informal ESOL learning groups run by volunteers and community organisations across the country are a vital part of learning, and we know they are often fantastic community assets. I know that there is good work ongoing to help reach learners in segmented communities, and that we should continue to work to ensure that such groups are joined up and coordinated. There are also other innovative forms of ESOL which should also be encouraged. In September, the adult education budget will be devolved to 6 combined authorities and the Greater London Authority, allowing for creative regional ways of delivering ESOL teaching. In the West Midlands, for example, the combined authorities is currently exploring ways of delivering more ESOL in workplaces specific to certain sectors to firm up the link between learning English and employment. These new powers and responsibilities need to be matched with the appropriate resources. So will the ministers tell us what these will be? Thus far, the government have ignored the moral case, so maybe they will listen to the economic one. Much of people's passion to learn English comes from their desire to find work, though this is certainly only part of the integration picture. For many, it is the main motivation to learn. If people were accessing 8 hours of ESOL classes per week, 2 years of those classes would be fully reimbursed to the taxpayer after an individual's first 8 months of employment at the national average wage. And in the case of supporting refugees to access ESOL, the cost of providing this volume of learning would be just 42 million per year. Moreover, leaving people to flounder without the ability to speak the language can have such a detrimental effect on their mental health and well-being and lead to isolation and loneliness. These are all extremely costly to the state and society, and investing in people who want to learn English is a smart thing to do.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way again and for the excellent point she is making. And would she suggest to the Minister that perhaps she might do as well to look at the German example, where all refugees in Germany have access to 600-hour language course, and which enables them to learn to speak German in this case, and that clearly the German government and the German economy sees a return on that investment in terms economic as well as social in terms of mental well-being.
I thank my honourable friend again for that intervention. I think that's really important. I wasn't aware of the German example, and I think the Minister will be really keen to maybe look at that after this debate. All political parties talk of the importance of helping people become productive, equal partners in their communities and supporting people like Noor to achieve their goals. Too often, though, the cuts to ESOL we have seen under the coalition and then Conservative governments have prevented it from happening. So today I would like to ask the Minister 4 questions. Will the Minister act now to ensure everyone can learn English? Will the Minister commit to producing a formal ESOL strategy for England? What steps is the Minister taking to ensure that people with particular barriers to learning, such as those with caring responsibilities or difficult travel arrangements, are given the resources they need to overcome them and to ensure that provision of ESOL is always accessible? And finally, to have an inclusive, welcoming country, additional investment is made to make sure everyone who needs it is given the opportunity to access high-quality, sufficient English language teaching. And will the Minister support my call and take these demands to the Treasury in advance of the forthcoming spending review? Thank you.